Everyone knows King Arthur and the Round Table. The Round Table was there, so everyone would be equal at the table. But there's a far lesser known novel that was written before King Arthur, in fact, by a monk.
King Carl and the Knights of the Coffee Table?
They drank a lot of coffee. They wouldn't sleep for days until they had done something chivalrous. In the winter, in a suit of armor, you kind of stood there and shivered.
And that's where chivalry came from.
Yeah, it means waiting for the warm weather. Father was one of those guys who looked for water with a stick, so we were always going to dry locations. And of course, dry locations means a lot of fires.
Well, his name was Sparky the Dreamer, wasn't it?
A friend of mine said, my dad's name is Alex. And so I went and asked my dad, I said, what's your name? He said, it's Sparko. I even found it on his driver's license.
Well, it was Sparky Tea Dreamer.
His mother was a big tea drinker. She used to drink high volumes, actually, of tea. And she was always quite hyperkinetic. So, of course, she gave her son tea instead of in his thermos. In his bottle, baby bottle. She called him Sparky because he was always so hyperactive.
What was her name?
She was...
Didn't they call her the Extinguisher?
Oh, that's right, the Extinguisher. That was after she put out that big chemical fire all by herself. And it traumatized poor Sparky. And he thought, all I'm ever going to do is try and find water to put out fire. His main thing was to find water to put out fires. But for him, it was his lifelong battle to find an arsenal water against the battle of fire. But he was a quiet man. He was so traumatized by the chemicals, he basically lost the use of his vocal cord. In the winter, in a suit of armor, you kind of stood there and shivered.
And that's where chivalry came from.
Yeah, it means waiting for the warm weather.
There were 3 knights and 1 king.
There was King Carl, and then there was Frederick the Wide. Frederick the Wide always got the other opposite length of the rectangular table because he needed a lot more room. Of course, the knights always slept in their suit of armor ready for action, and they just put like hooks under their underarms, and they would hang themselves on the wall ready for action.
Was King Arthur on the wide end?
Oh, King Arthur was on the wide side, and then on the other side of King Arthur was Frederick the Wide. To the left was Henry the Round. He had a hard time staying at the table, and the floor wasn't all that level. He would actually just roll, and they would have a great mirthful laugh about that.
He'd often get caught in a rut somewhere.
Yeah, they would just leave him there because it was difficult to roll back. And the other end of the short side table was Peter the Narrow. Yeah, so they each had their own qualifications to be round, narrow, and wide. King Carl, if you looked at him straight on, he looked kind of normal. But if you turned sideways, he was as thin as a rake.
Oh, he was like two-dimensional.
Yeah, he was a two-dimensional man. He was almost invincible in a fight because he would just turn sideways and disappear.
But sometimes you would get caught up like a sail in the wind.
Yes, he would do that intentionally. They thought he possessed magical abilities because only, a wizard could fly. The myth of Merlin in King Arthur, Merlin the wizard, well, King Carl was actually his own wizard.
What, didn't he put a wizard out of work because of that?
Oh yeah, Woody the Wizard wannabe. He had a lot of resentment. In fact, he became King Carl's nemesis. He blamed him for being unemployed. Then he decided that the best thing to do was to help King Carl's enemies. But he was a quiet man. He was so traumatized by the chemicals, he basically lost the use of his vocal cord.
It's Sparky the Dreamer, right?
So that's what the kids taunted him with at school. Someone called him Sparko. He immediately flew into a rage and threatened to start the individual on fire. But he did say, if I did start you on fire, I would put you out. No one ever got really hurt. A lot of people were embarrassed. He was very good at it. He was able to just burn someone's pants off.
Well, he's the guy who started that phrase, liar, liar, pants on fire.
He would taunt the individual as their pants were up in flames.
Even if they weren't lying.
Oh, no, he said they were lying because they were calling him Sparko. And the truth was that his name was Sparky. And he felt that all liars should have their pants on fire.
Why didn't he pick shirts?
The thing about Sparky was he had a grand sense of humor, and he just thought it sounded funny. Once he burnt this person's pants off, and the guy said, "What the hell did you burn my pants off? My shirt is a piece of crap, and you ruined my good trousers." And he says, "Liar, liar, your shirt's on fire isn't as funny as saying, liar, liar, your pants on fire. The only reason I do this is for practice and a good laugh."
And to teach you a lesson.
And to teach the person a lesson. And usually, if your pants go, your underpants go too. Usually the person would just flee in embarrassment. And everyone knew that Sparky was around and someone had called him Sparko.
Is he still alive?
It has been rumored that he actually set someone's pants on fire just last week.
Was he running down the street buck naked from the waist down?
Yes, the victim was. It was someone who overcharged him for cutting his lawn. Oh man, that guy regretted that. He didn't know about Sparky, because he'd been kind of out of commission for a while. And so this guy, all of a sudden, he thought he could take advantage of an old man. And he said, listen, it's $10 more. What are you going to do? If you don't give me the $10, I'm just going to throw weed seeds on your lawn. And and Sparky, he just got over. He said, just a minute, let me get my lighter fluid. But the guy was stupid. He didn't catch on.
Well, he caught on fire.
Oh, he caught on then. He had a lot of resentment. In fact, he became King Carl's nemesis. He blamed him for being unemployed. Then he decided that the best thing to do was to help King Carl's enemies.
Wasn't it like Robin Hood?
They were a bunch of irate bakers. That's why they named flour after Robin Hood. Robin Hood had nothing to do with bakers. The lesser-known vagabonds of the forest were bakers.
Wasn't there Baguette the Jolly?
He was a grand fellow. Then there was Cinnamon Face and Flatbread Henry.
What was the leader of the band of Merry Men?
Luxurious George. He was always singing and dressed in flowing robes.
Well, he was the first drag queen.
Yeah, but no one knew what a drag queen was. They didn't realize that he was a drag queen. They just thought that he had a flamboyant fashion sense.
Now, they lived in the forest amongst the animals.
In King Carl's time, there was
flying beavers.
Yeah, flying beavers. They'd leap at you from the trees. It was quite terrifying. All those flapping tails. They just descend on you and eat anything that was made of wood. And they had wooden swords.
It was somewhat comical when you would see some guy trying to use a wooden sword, and you would laugh so much that he'd be able to hit you over the head.
Yes, that's how they defeated their enemies, with humor.
Right. They used to write joke to try to defeat their enemy.
And Luxurious George, he'd always say the same joke. Have you heard the one about the plumber and the wood carver? And then the person being subjected to this joke would get angry because he's already heard the joke and said, why can't you tell something new? Every time we're in battle, you tell the same damn joke. They only had one joke. They knew the answer. They said, I already know the answer. It's the goddamn baker.
What was the wizard's name? The wannabe wizard?
Oh, yeah. His name was Woody. Woody the Wannabe Wizard, also known as WWW.
I mean, he's the guy who first started the internet. He had written down all these web pages. They were all written down on pieces of paper.
Yeah, and then he would just attach them to pigeons. And then the pigeon would fly, and someone would get, it's this guy with his, he calls it the internet, and it's just messenger pigeons. So why does he think it's such an original idea? And then he said, but it's a magic trick. And they said, there's nothing magic about it. It's just a pigeon, and you tie a message to it. People have done this for ages. It's nothing original. He'd get despondent.
Everybody was trying to invent things that had already been invented and get credit for it.
Yeah, well, he was kind of desperate, and he'd always just blame King Carl. King Carl had nothing to do with it.
Didn't he say that he invented walking?
He even had it patented. He had to force the guy to patent it because he said, what do you mean? You can't patent walking. Well, how can you patent walking?
Right.
And then he threatened the guy with his wooden sword.
That's patent number one.
The first patent ever put out. Oh man, that guy regretted that. He didn't know about Sparky, because he'd been kind of out of commission for a while. And so this guy, all of a sudden, he thought he could take advantage of an old man. And he said, listen, it's $10 more. What are you going to do? If you don't give me the $10, I'm just going to throw weed seeds on your lawn. And and Sparky, he just got over. He said, just a minute, let me get my lighter fluid. But the guy was stupid. He didn't catch on.
Well, he caught on fire.
Oh, he caught on then.
During the first Gulf War in the early 90s, Saddam set all the oil fields on fire. They used Sparky to help put them out. What's the story behind that?
These other U.S. contractors get all the credit. They'd have to take a big explosive and just blow the fire out. Whereas Sparky, well, he would just say, fight fire with fire. He'd just start another fire. Well, it didn't work very well, actually. He went over on the pretense that he would help put out fires, but they soon quickly realized that he was not very good at putting out that size of a fire. He entertained the troops. He would light people's pants on fire, and they loved it. They'd have entertainment. The band would come out, and then everyone would go, Sparky, Sparky, Sparky. And then he would come out on stage, and they'd have someone come out the guy would just say, "Hey, Sparko, what's going on?" And he would fly into a rage and light the guy's pants on fire. And they loved it. They cheered and it gave him standing ovations. He got a Medal of Honor for just being so ridiculous.
Was he required to light his own pants on fire? Because he said he would go and put these fires out.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was always hard on himself, and he got despondent. They couldn't keep pants on the guy for almost 3 weeks. And he was walking around, with no pants on. And people were getting kind of tired of it. So they gave him fireproof pants just so he would stop doing it. Put these pants on, Sparky, because, it's just ridiculous. The troops don't want to see your bare ass and genitals all over the place here in the desert. And he said, yeah, but I have to do it. I lied. I have to punish myself. And they said, well, okay, you burnt enough. You've already burned 50 pairs of military issue pants. He just wouldn't stop. He even started lighting pants that were coming in for the troops before anyone got to put them on. He was completely out of control. He was burning pants. They had to restrain him, and somehow he would escape. He'd escape by burning all the guards' pants. All the guards in the prison had to wear fire retardant pants just to deal with them. Somehow he was able to smuggle lighter fluid. He was able to make sparks with his fingernails. It's actually quite remarkable. Scientists have been studying this, and they don't know how the hell he does it. But he always manages to start someone's pants on fire. But the truth of the matter is he had a lot of fans. And the fans, they couldn't get enough of them. They would just smuggle little flint-starting sparkers, for starting campfires and stuff. They'd smuggle it inside his loaf of bread or in his cake. Things get smuggled into prisons. And he was always managing to get something from one of his many fans who always followed his every step of his inadequate military career out there trying to put fires out. He destroyed about $1 million worth of military issue pants. They said, look, we're having a pants shortage here. We got to do something about Sparky.
Because of that, the U.S. Army, one time they had to go into battle without pants, the Great Buck Naked Battle.
It was funny, though. It threw the enemy off, and they thought that it was a trick. I mean, who the hell would charge another army butt naked? And so they ran away.
And these guys, often they had just come out of pools, right?
Yeah, the enemy thought the Americans had some sort of secret weapon that was able to just burn off everyone's pants. And they didn't want that to happen to them.
Why would you use a weapon on yourself to show the enemy that you had the weapon?
Well, they just thought it had gotten out of control. Just such an unstable weapon that they thought, my God, if they get too close to us, it's going to happen to us. They thought it was a contagion. They didn't know that it was just one man.
Didn't he say that he invented walking?
He even had it patented. He had to force the guy to patent it because he said, what do you mean? You can't patent walking? How can you patent walking?
Right.
And then he threatened the guy with his wooden sword.
That's patent number one.
The first patent ever put out.
Who invented the patent office?
White Henry.
Was he related to Frederick the Wide?
Well, that was Frederick the Wide. Yeah. Well, White Henry was Frederick the Wide, younger brother. They were from the whole family of Wide people.
And wasn't there Puddle Steve?
Yeah, he made a great spy. If you needed to spy on the enemy, you would just get Puddle Steve, and he would just lie within a few feet. He gets stepped on a lot, but it was all in the line of duty. This was the time before third dimension came into being, and everyone was two-dimensional.
And there was the occasional one-dimensional person.
Oh, that was Wilson the Dot. Wilson the Dot always hung out with his good buddy, though, Flambe the Line. When they got together, then they'd be two-dimensional.
Wilson the Dot had a friend called Harry the Point.
Oh, yes, Harry the Point. People didn't like him very much. He was always making exclamation marks.
We got together with Flambe the Line, right?
There would just be a hell of a lot of grammatical errors when these guys got together.
What about that guy with the broken back, posterior of the hook?
Yeah.
And then Wilson the Dot would go under posterior of the hook to make a question mark.
Oh, yeah, that's when they were partying. But they, like all good nights, they needed a quest. And they sat around the coffee table and they were drinking massive amounts of coffee. And Peter the Narrow was complaining that they hadn't really done anything. They get together and they always talk about being noble and everything, but they need a quest, like to do something where all their grand talents can be challenged. So King Carl, he started thinking about this and he turned sideways and everybody said, where'd King Carl go? Peter the Narrow started getting pissed off because he thought King Carl had just took off as soon as he had to solve a problem. And then Henry the Wide told Peter the Narrow to shut up. And then they asked, hey, where's Henry the Round? Oh, he had rolled away from the table across the floor and got stuck at the other side in a fire pit.
It's hard to keep.
And then King Carl suddenly looked like he reappeared because he had turned sideways.
Whenever he was addressing a crowd that were in a circle around him, there'd always be two people that couldn't see him.
That's right. Yeah, and there will always be confusion. He'd be trying to talk. He always had to tell people to shut up because someone's always going, where did he go? He was standing right there. And then King Carl would turn to the person who's talking, and then he would reappear to the other person. He said, what? You're right, he did disappear. And he said, no, he's there now. He was disappeared, now he's there. And then King Carlos would say, would you shut up? I'm trying to bequeath knowledge unto you, invalids.
Right.
And the reason they drank coffee and got tired was because they profoundly bored each other. King Carl found Peter the Narrow very boring. Round Henry, well, you couldn't talk to him because you didn't know where his face was.
Sometimes he'd roll around with his head on the bottom, and you thought his head was on top, so you'd be talking to his ass.
That would really piss off King Carl when he found out he'd spent the last half hour talking to Round Henry's ass. And Frederick the Wide thought this was hilarious.
The people from the forest, Robin Hood and whatever their name was, that's when they came in, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, but that was fortunate because then it gave King Carl a quest. And the quest was to get back at Robin Hood and his irritating bakers.
What were their names again?
Flatbread Frank.
Wasn't there Peter Panini?
Oh, yes. Also known as Peter Pouch Bread.
And those guys were perfectly normal. They didn't have any of these
Dimensional problems.
I mean, that's the real reason King Carl isn't known as well as King Arthur.
People thought they were, wizards. I mean, it looked like King Carl could just disappear and reappear at will. And he would always get quite irritated. He says, what do you mean I was just here? He said, no, you disappeared. And he said, no, I didn't. Oh, look over there. And they said, you disappeared again. And he would turn back to the person, I'm here, I'm still here. And big argument.
And Wilson the Dot, I mean, it didn't matter what direction you were looking at him from. He had two friends that he used to get together with, Peter the Point and Third Dot. So those three used to get together and form an ellipsis.
And then sometimes when Wilson the Dot had some relatives over, he would become etc.
Right. They had rousing parties.
They'd never complete their sentences and just leave it up to the other person's imagination.
To figure it out, right? Wilson the Dot and Peter the Point used to get together. That would be Bart the Colon.
People would get kind of annoyed because he would always lend an air of anticipation that something was following. He didn't supply the rest.
What about Chris the Comma?
Well, he could just walk into a crowd and make a whole bunch of jumbled mess and make some sense.
And then the three dots would come along.
Yeah, there was always a party when etc. would show up.
This is how the Bible was written.
In fact, King Carl, Narrow Pete, Frederick the Wide, and Henry the Round, they wrote one of the first Bibles. But no one could make any sense of it. It was a whole book of punctuations. It was just continued. There's etc. and question marks, exclamation marks, commas, periods, quotations, and no one could understand what it was because they didn't have any letters.
This is why this kingdom fell, because they couldn't do anything.
Exactly. King Carl and the Knights of the Coffee Table, they never really did go on any quest. They just kept on ruminating and talking about what they should do. They never concluded anything because they never could put together a proper sentence.